Before we get into this commentary,
yeah, we're doing Effie's response, and it's as pathetic as you'd predict. You might want to watch the original 2-part takedown of his video. It actually takes him several minutes to even get to me, and when he does, he really lets us know how horrible a person he is.
Also, spoilers, he doesn't actually explain why I'm defending racist elites at any point in this video. Now, he does in part 2,
but they're the same response. They were written as one big response, and the only reason they were divided into 2 parts was the difficulty in doing lengthy voiceovers. I made that clear. And the only reason for him to do this is just plain dishonesty. It doesn't matter whether I did something in part 1 or part 2, they're the same response. Part 2 just picks up where part 1 left off. Not a good start, and he hasn't even gotten to my video yet. A couple of things before we move on. This one was also requested by Executioner, otherwise I probably wouldn't have bothered. As usual, if you'd like to request a video, go to Patreon or Subscribestar and subscribe at the $2 level. Also, you'll notice a departure from how I normally mix the audio. Ordinarily, I'll keep the other person's audio as it is, or even do things to make it better like normalizing it. I do that to keep the quality of my videos up, and also because I don't want to engage in cheap tactics making my opponent's videos seem worse than they are. In this case, you'll notice it sounds a bit telephony. This is due to a request of a commenter to the previous video. He was listening to the video in his car, and he was having trouble telling the parts I'd originally said from the new responses just by listening. So for that reason, the more tinny audio is what I'm responding to. It's just to make that more clear. Please don't read anything more into it than that. I'm flabbergasted at the idea of someone being in love with a piece of paper.
I'm aware of that.
Oh, you were, huh? Okay, well, thanks for admitting that you were lying. You knew perfectly well what I was doing, and had to pretend it was something other than what you knew it was. I can sort of understand it when Christians are like that with the Bible, or Muslims the Quran.
But not when Hindus are like that with the Bhagavad Gita. Then it goes back to being ridiculous.
Seriously? But when it's about a government document, it's just beyond creepy.
Aren't you the one who said the Constitution is more than just a document, it is instead a list of universal principles?
That doesn't mean it's something you worship. Frederick Bastiat's The Law is a book of universal principles too. It would still be weird to say I'm in love with it.
Maybe those universal principles are what he meant to refer to.
Except they're not, are they? He went against them every chance he got. Anyway, I'm done talking about Beat's video, since it's clear Effie's just gonna lie about it. I'll just focus on his response to me. The Constitution is a document of universal principles.
No, it's a document that sets up a government.
Based on universal principles.
But not of those principles.
Geez, do you not know how the English language works? Those mean the same thing.
Which was my entire point. I was just taking a shot at your wording.
Yeah, you were playing semantic games, just like you are now, because you don't have any actual refutation to make.
Okay, Shane, you as a libertarian should know the Second Amendment was not written so we could defend ourselves. It was written so we could overthrow the government in case it became tyrannical.
Every time. Every single time I think I've heard it all, that no one could possibly say anything stupider, someone does. Why would you think they do one without the other? Our founders were very concerned about personal defense, and if you'd bothered to do your research, you would have seen that. For example, John Adams wrote in the Boston Gazette on September 5, 1763, "Resistance to sudden violence for the preservation not only of my person, my limbs, and life, but of my property, is an indisputable right of nature which I have never surrendered to the public by the compact of society, and which perhaps I could not surrender if I would." Later on in 1788, he wrote in A Defense of the Constitutions of the United States, "To suppose arms in the hands of citizens to be used at individual discretion, except in private self-defense, or by partial orders of towns, countries, or districts of a state, is to demolish every constitution and lay the laws prostrate, so that liberty can be enjoyed by no man. And he wasn't the only one. In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote in Thoughts on Defensive War, "The supposed quietude of a good man allures the ruffian, while on the other hand, arms, like laws, discourage and keep the invader and plunderer in awe, and preserve order in the world as property." It wasn't just the founders, it was the sense of the people as well. The State Gazette of South Carolina published on September 8, 1788, "Such are a well-regulated militia, composed of the freeholders, citizen, and husbandmen, who take up arms to preserve their property as individuals and their rights as freemen." And the Boston Independent Chronicle wrote on October 25, 1787, "It was in the law of nature for every man to defend himself, and unlawful for any man to deprive him of those weapons of self-defense." It's ridiculous to claim that the Second Amendment doesn't cover self-defense. The founders emphasized overthrowing a tyrannical government because they'd just gone through it. But the relative paucity of quotes about personal defense is not because they didn't believe it or because they thought the Second Amendment didn't cover it. It's because they didn't think there'd be someone as stupid as you denying it. Self-defense is the principle. And since we have the right of self-defense, we have the right to come together to defend ourselves from gangs, invaders, and even our own government. I mentioned Bastiat's The Law earlier. Read that if you want to know more about how this works. Link is in the description.
You're right, the means of communication have changed a lot in the past quarter millennia, and legal authorities have constantly decided that this means that different standards need to be applied to different forms of communication.
No, they have not! Many of them have tried using that as an excuse, the way they have with the Second Amendment, but things like Section 230 are the preservation of common law protections to the Internet. And in case after case after case, the First Amendment is absolutely upheld in cases involving speech on the Internet.
Hence things like the 1978 Supreme Court ruling FCC v. Pacifica Foundation. I'm not even saying I agree with any of its usages, I'm just stating how the world works at time of recording.
No, you are not! Or else you would have pointed out that that case no longer applies. Congress tried putting that into statute with the Communications Decency Act. That didn't last, did it? In fact, the Act's only remaining section in force is Section 230, which was really just miscoded under the CDA as it was proposed as a separate act, the Internet Freedom and Family Empowerment Act, which was in opposition to the CDA. I have a video explaining this. The rest of it was invalidated by a bunch of decisions, such as Reno v. ACLU. So, at best, you have politicians trying to worm their way around it, just like they did initially with things like the Alien and Sedition Acts. I don't really know what you think you're trying to prove here. How is that relativistic?
Because it's only wrong in certain times and if done by certain people, as opposed to being wrong universally.
Hey, you remember when Effie complained that I was cutting off Bede and taking him out of context when I wasn't? Isn't that what he just did by cutting me off before my explanation and pretending I said something I didn't? They're recognizing war as an exception that needed its own limitation.
Okay, I think you and I have very different definitions of relative in this context.
Yeah, we must. Mine being the sane one. Again, the principle here is that the military should be subordinate to the civil power.
Because what you basically just asked translates to, how is something situational relativistic? Because it's situational.
Making different rules for different situations in different contexts does not violate the principle, and anyone with more than 2 brain cells to knock together can see it. I want everyone to appreciate how long it took me to write this next part. I have never, and I mean never, had to dumb down my thinking enough to explain it to someone like I'm doing now with Effie. And I had to think long and hard to come up with examples a 3rd grader could understand to explain it to him. So, you have the right to keep and bear arms. You can do that on your property or on public property. But if you're on someone else's property, they can tell you that they don't want you bringing guns. And you can either leave your guns at home or just not go onto their property. Since it's their property, they get to say. And it's not an inconsistency since it's all part of the same core principle. For another example, you have freedom of speech and religion, but you don't have the right to go onto someone else's property and preach without their permission. If you go into a mosque or a synagogue and start preaching from the book of Revelation, they might well tell you to shut up or leave, perfectly within their rights. By the same token, you can't go into a public school and preach. That is the case without being inconsistent, because again, it's part of the same core principle. Just as all the elements of the Third Amendment are part of the same core principle of the military being subordinate to the civil power. I cannot believe I'm actually having to explain this! They knew the government would be doing a lot of, "Oh, well, we're at war, so times are different." They're doing it today, just like they did back then.
Yeah, and the Founding Fathers at least somewhat agreed with that notion, considering the Third Amendment is weakened during time of war.
Oh, for crying out loud, I just explained this! Twice!
And Congress has the right to suspend habeas corpus during the time of war.
Because one of the things you need to do in war is to keep POWs. What else are you going to do with prisoners of the invading army? Did you even think about this, let alone research the ratification debates like I told you to do? The whole point was to make these troops subject to the civil authority, something Article 1 also does and was a big point in the Declaration of Independence. It's not relativistic!
You know, nothing you just said disproves my point, right? I didn't say that these exceptions were created arbitrarily.
Yes, you did! Because if it's not arbitrary, then it's all based on the principle.
Mind you, there are some facts that you ignore. For example, I highly doubt the issue the colonists had with an army they were currently fighting and viewed as nothing more than occupiers from a foreign nation was that it wasn't done through a legislative body that they did not recognize the legitimacy of over them.
You know this is to be a limitation of their own army, right? Not that of a foreign nation. Anyway, it was one of many issues they had. The military wasn't subordinate to the civil power. I quote the Declaration of Independence. He is affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. It was also the case that they weren't given proper representation in Parliament. Again, I quote, "For suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever." But even if the Crown had recognized their legislative powers, that still wouldn't have mattered if the army can just do whatever they want. Are you really so simple-minded that you think our founders could only ever have one issue with the Crown?
Oh, also, it was hard to convince colonial assemblies to pay for the quartering of British soldiers during the French and Indian War in the first place.
Right, which meant that without the support of the people, in other words, without it being in a manner prescribed by law, they shouldn't be allowed to do it. They could do it by convincing the people that it was necessary in that scenario. So how do you think this invalidates the principles? I'm even having trouble conceiving what your problem is.
Okay, Shane, I put the text I read on screen.
The problem isn't the text on your screen, it's the stupidity in your brain. Is anyone else noticing that as the things he says get more and more dumb, his tone gets more and more smug?
My entire point is this is a document of policies, not universal principles like you said.
No, your point is that you don't understand what those principles are and are unwilling to learn. Otherwise, you'd know the difference between common law and admiralty law and the reason for the distinction, which I already explained to you.
This is nothing more than an ad hominem.
There were no ad hominems in my video, and this is certainly not one. What you are doing, though, is known as ad hominem recursus, using the false accusation of an ad hominem to try and get around the argument, and making an ad hominem of your own in the process. It is not an ad hominem to say you are completely ignorant of why things in the Constitution are written as they are. It's just the facts. The exception here is for 2 reasons.
Okay, let me stop you right there, Shane, because this is the same issue as your point about the Third Amendment. I never said this was for no reason, I just said it was. Saying it was for a reason doesn't debunk my point, because you are responding to a point I never made.
Your point is that this makes the amendment inconsistent. In order for that to be the case, it would have to be for no reason or for arbitrary reasons. Because if they have good reasons to make the exception, the principle isn't violated. Maybe I did get one thing wrong in the last video. Maybe Effie's not playing dumb. Maybe he really is this dumb. I mean, I don't know how someone could be that stupid and still work a computer, but this guy makes Adam from New Earth look like Stephen Hawking. You do know that I watch the videos all the way through first, right? That is what you just did with mine, isn't it?
You know I was being rhetorical with that statement, right?
No, you were poisoning the well. Don't get snippy with me just because I called you on it.
You consistently cut Beat off before he explains himself, primarily for no reason other than to insult him or poison the well.
Wow, more confession through projection. There was no poisoning the well with my video, but that's what you just did with me. Typical lying scum. This is a tactic the creationists always like to pull. If you didn't include every single word in your response, they'd use it against you, even when you're only trying to keep the links down to something manageable.
Again, the issue has never been you cutting things out of the original video. It's you cutting things out that change the context of what Beat is saying and give a misleading impression to your audience.
But I never did that, and you know it! Whereas you've done that several times with me. And I don't even know the point of this next segment, other than there are things I said that are completely valid criticisms that you don't like, that you wish I had cut out. Pathetic.
That past 40 seconds was just him insulting Beat, usually without adding any kind of point.
Lie, 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 lie! And everyone who saw my video knows you're lying. Those were all valid criticisms of what Beat was doing. You don't like them because you're part of his cult, but you can't actually argue against them, so you have to engage in this desperate character attack.
My point is, if this is really about time, there are other things you could be doing to—
You're complaining that I shouldn't have put in new content, which I will word and edit however I see fit, thank you very much. And just on a side note, it wouldn't hurt your videos much if you picked up an editing skill or two. For instance, editors have come up with all sorts of ways of signifying an edit without putting a big stupid word skip on the screen in Comic Sans. But instead insisting I should play an even longer summary of the part of Beat's video I was responding to. And the worst part is, in the first part, which I didn't respond to because he was talking to Executioner, he actually said,
Also, your first points are based on the character, i.e. background and props, and not an actual point. Okay, I'm allowed to talk about aspects of the video other than just the arguments. What's your point exactly?
I take it back. You're not as bad as the creationists. You're worse!
But is 30 minutes really that big a deal for you guys?
Yes, because of this little thing called quality. Not the least of which is production values. Not just bloviating ad libitum into a microphone and haphazardly editing in someone else's images, but instead using original artwork, good sound mixing, and proper editing techniques. These things take time. As does viewing your video all the way through, and then going through it again as I decide which portions I want to use and how I want to respond to it, doing the necessary research to go into all of this, and putting it all into a script. Then recording it, often with multiple takes, making sure to minimize environmental noise, and properly compress and EQ the audio. There's also things like the rendering and uploading times for 4K animated video at 60 frames per second, unlike your... What is that, 240p or something? You uploaded 720, but your content isn't anywhere near that resolution. You're not even using the resolution of the Misty DVDs. The point is, Some of us care about making quality videos with quality arguments without wasting people's time. And then there's people like you.
Because over here in the slideshow commentary community, we go over that all the time. Just in the past year, I've done a 56-minute commentary on Omnizoa, a 43-minute commentary on Neko Coda, a 34-minute commentary on Keyblade Master.
I shudder to think what sitting through all that must be like. But again, you're pushing for mere quantity over quality. Your quality is sorely lacking. Not just in production values, but in intellectual values as well. You make no attempt to understand the facts, no attempt to understand the arguments, and you just smugly spew off the top of your head whatever sounds right at the time. It's easy to make longer content when you do that. It's impossible to make quality content. For crying out loud, it takes you 2 whole minutes just to make this one point. And they can also be easily coerced and manipulated.
So can every human being in all of existence.
Are you serious? Are you really saying that the possibility of manipulating independent adults is exactly the same thing as being able to coerce and manipulate smaller humans whose brains haven't stopped developing yet and who still have parents and guardians who are full authorities over their lives?
Okay, a couple of things. First off, I never said it was equally as easy to manipulate adults and minors.
That was absolutely the implication. Because if they're not comparable, then you don't have a point.
I just said that both could be manipulated. There's no such thing as a fully developed brain. Your brain is constantly changing throughout your entire life.
Why don't you go say that to a neuroscientist and see how he laughs at you? Yes, the brain keeps changing because it's wetware, but the development of the brain fully matures around age 24, and many cortices have myelinated years before then. And I know this because, unlike you, I did this thing called research.
This is a total ad hominem on Shane's part.
What? How is that in any way an ad hominem?
I don't know, Shane. Why don't we play the clip where I say that in the original video and see if we can figure out why I called that an ad hominem?
Oh, I already know why, you lying scumbag! It's because you don't have a clue what it actually means, even after mindlessly sticking up a screenshot of it. It's just some Latin-y phrase you found and thought you could score some points by throwing it around. Because you've said it a lot, and not in one single case has it actually applied.
This is a total ad hominem on Shane's part. The value of ideas are not judged by the other ideas people who have those ideas hold.
Unless it shows the motivation for it, the reason why it's being pushed, and the goal of those pushing it. And it does. You want to avoid that because you want to be one of the manipulators, or at least you think the manipulators are on your team, but it's not an ad hominem.
You were quite literally saying lowering the voting age was bad because people who support it want bigger government.
That is not what I was saying, and you know it, liar! And since I've already explained it 4 times, you have no excuse. You are just a liar!
Funny you mention this because Beat actually addresses this criticism.
No, he didn't. He lied about the history of the amendment.
First off, those aren't mutually exclusive. I never said Beat was honest or correct.
Oh, for the love of Mike.
I just said he addressed your criticisms.
He didn't! His addressing was a lie that I responded to.
Second off, what do you mean he lied about the history of this amendment? Because I went back to Beat's original video, and this is the only mention of the history of the amendment in his video.
The next one is an actual proposed amendment, almost ratified in the 1970s, known as the Equal Rights Amendment.
Which is a lie, because as I said, that amendment had been around for over 150 years by that point. With certain portions, like the right of women to vote, being ratified into the Constitution, or otherwise passed into statute or recognized by the Supreme Court. He's pretending that the amendment as stated showed up whole cloth in the 1970s, which, as I pointed out at the time, is not true!
Just because you don't see discrimination against women now doesn't mean you won't see it in the future.
See what I mean? He has no evidence on his side, but he still gets to assert that it isn't fixed and win by default. Doesn't work that way, Effie.
The only things I'm asserting is that Beat said this,
And I'm explaining to you why it is not in any way a valid argument. Oh, there might be evidence out there, we just don't see it. What's even the point?
this responded to one of your criticisms against him and that you didn't play this in your original commentary.
Why should I? He wasn't actually saying anything. I explained what he got wrong and moved on. You don't like it, but you can't form a counter-argument, so you lie!
Oh, and as for this, what Beat said would more accurately be characterized as absence of evidence today doesn't necessarily mean absence of evidence tomorrow.
Sorry, but that is not valid reasoning. Even if you do try and shove in the word tomorrow, it doesn't make a difference. And if you want to know why, I'll give you a hint to push you in the direction of the proper logic. The fact that a teapot has been in orbit behind me this whole time. Look up Russell's teapot. So I think we're done with Effie. We can see the kind of person he is and why no one should take him seriously. Doing anything more would be a complete and utter waste of time. So thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, leave a comment, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.